All right, hello. Welcome to the second part of our event for the March 8th International Women's Day. Thank you to my colleague, Dr. Danielle Slackoff from the Department of Criminal Justice for starting us with the keynote speaker, right? We were very blessed to have Sacramento Council member Katie Valenzuela. All right, so I would like us to get started for the second part of this event, which will be the virtual panel. So can I please have my presenters turn on their cameras so that the audience can view all of us? Okay, I'll go ahead and get started in the interest of time. We have amazing panelists, so much to talk about, and not enough time. We are still waiting on one participant, but my colleague is helping me contact her while I get us started. All right, welcome. My name is Maria Vargas, Assistant Professor of Chicanx, Latinx Studies and Ethnic Studies. So I'm going to translate for myself. I'm going to, because we have two panelists that are Spanish native speakers, I will speak in English and then I'll translate into Spanish. My research interest is grounded in feminicide studies in relation to indigenous women in Guatemala. I would like to introduce our virtual panel by thanking our amazing panelists for joining us today. And it is, a real pleasure to just be in this virtual space with you. So I'm just going to introduce, just state the names of our panelists. Morningstar Gali from Restoring Justice for Indigenous Peoples, Irene de Baracua from Líderes Campesinas, Edith Elizondo from Alerta Raquel, and Andrea Guadalupe Luna Santana from the organization Diversidad Sexual de Chihuahua, Sexual Diversity of Chihuahua. I myself, in my own work, approach the study of violence against women through what Elga Martinez Salazar has called racialized feminicides as the underside of genocide that links racialized, gendered, sexual, and class violence all simultaneously. In the introduction to the book, Transitional Justice, Global Mechanisms and the Local Realities After Genocide, Alexander Hinton states, and this is, I think, important to really, to really start off this conversation in terms of embracing the, quote, messiness of global and transnational involvement and the local, on-the-ground realities with which they intersect, complexities that are too often glossed over. Buenas tardes, me llamo María Elena Vargas, soy profesora en los estudios Chicanx y Latinx y en los estudios étnicos aquí en la Universidad de Sacramento. El interés de mi investigación se basa en los estudios sobre feminicidios en relación con las mujeres indígenas de Guatemala. Me gustaría presentar nuestro panel virtual, agradeciendo a nuestras increíbles panelistas por unirse hoy. Yo, en mi trabajo, entiendo la violencia contra la mujer a través del concepto feminicidio racializado, que fue desarrollado por Egla Martínez Salazar, donde ella define feminicidio racializado como el lado oculto de genocidio, que vincula la violencia racial, la violencia de género, la violencia sexual y la violencia de clase social. En la introducción del libro Justicia Transicional, Mecanismos Globales y Realidades Locales después del genocidio, Alexander Hinton nos recuerda que es muy importante respetar el desorden de lo global, de lo transnacional y las realidades locales que siempre se cruzan y las complejidades que muchas veces se ocultan. Y ojalá eso es lo que la conversación nos va a llevar. Bueno, muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Again, to stay on time, I will go ahead and start off with Morning Star Galley. Para empezar, con Morning Star Galley, take it away.
Shimisanwi, greetings. My name is Morning Star Galley. I am Ajamawi Band of Pit River, and I am here on occupied Nisenan, Miwok, and Mighty Lands in Sacramento, California. I just want to say thank you so much for hosting this panel on International Indigenous Women's Day. It's very much an honor to be here with all of you. I really want to take a minute to acknowledge Dr. Katie Sarabia. Dr. Sarabia and I organized together over 15 years ago in the Bay Area. So it's really nice to be here and also to see so many familiar faces of both students and presenters with you today. I'm here today to speak a bit about the organizing and around the epidemic that is known as missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit relatives. And we use relatives in general in respect and honor of our gender expansive, non-binary, trans and two-spirit relations. And so we recognize that this is an epidemic, as you heard from Council Member Valenzuela speak earlier about some of our efforts that are taking place here in the Sacramento area that we have been organizing around the efforts of the crisis of MMIW. I do want to acknowledge that a sister that is here and just speak her name. She's from the Sacramento area, Jessica Orozco. She was killed a couple of years ago down in the Arizona area while she was working for the Wallapai tribe. She was a biologist. She was a wildlife biologist and would use the hashtag plants, not pants. And she was just a very sweet Native woman that was a friend of mine. And so I think that, you know, when we are talking about these issues of MMIW, that this isn't something, you know, that's far off or distance, you know, far off in the distance, that this is something that we deal with every day, something that we deal with, you know, and affects us on a daily basis. And so as Council Member Valenzuela was mentioning, you know, in terms of her indigeneity, and I just, you know, had put in the chat there that speaks to the erasure and the invisibility that as Indigenous women, as California Native women, as we face on a daily basis, that this is a systemic issue, that the erasure occurs daily with that. And so I know that there were some questions, and so I don't know if you want me to kind of wait, just give that introduction and go by those questions, or how would you like?
Thank you. Yes, I think, you know, at first everybody can have 10 to 12 minutes. You're great on time to just introduce yourself, your organization, your activism. And then once everybody, you know, has gone a first run through, then we'll definitely delve into the questions.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'll just share that I serve as project director for Restoring Justice for Indigenous Peoples. I will put our website here in the chat. It's indigenousjustice.org. And so addresses and speaks to the disparities of Native women within not only the criminal justice system, but how that system is used against us, and how, it is this double-edged sword where we are seeking protection from violence. We are seeking protection from those violent systems, and then also how the system is used against us in that way. And so let me put that in the chat here. And so part of what we do is that we provide direct support to families of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. We provide emergency funding and shelter to the families and to survivors directly, just in recognizing, the bureaucracy and the red tape that many face when they are, in emergency situations. We provide media support and media training. I think that, far too often Native women and Indigenous women are spoken about in the media in the past tense, as though we no longer exist. If it's even reported at all. With Jessica's story, there was very little to none news coverage on her murder, on what occurred, and that's just so often the case. And so, highlighting and addressing these stories in a way that supports the families and supports how the families are seeking justice and deciding what justice looks like for them in these cases. And so we provide that media support and training. We do the organizing efforts, and then we're also providing that that direct support and services through our JIP. I want to talk a bit about the river walk that was held, that was mentioned by Council Member Valenzuela, that it was last April, that it was really a group of us that came together. It was through Restoring Justice for Indigenous Peoples, Native Sister Circle. It was really a collaborative of Native women here in Sacramento that we recognized, the need for to center healing for the survivors, for their families. And so we had 12 to 15 missing and murdered Indigenous families, impacted families. And honestly, we thought, Saturday morning, 8 a.m., we'll have a prayer down at the river and we will have a march. And we started at Sutter's Fort, we started at Sutter's Landing, and then we marched to Sutter's Fort, and recognizing what Sutter's Fort means for California Native peoples, that it really is this physical symbol of genocide and enslavement for Native peoples, and in the way that the fort is located, the proximity of it, to the state capitol, the way that it is named. It was a reclamation of our history and of our present day conditions. And so we organized expecting, maybe we'll get 200 people to show up that morning of, and we ended up getting 3 times that. We had 600 people that showed up, which is just really beautiful, and so many families, and to be able to bring the family members together in that way, where they don't feel so isolated, where they don't feel that this is an issue that's just directly impacting them, where the families had that opportunity to come together and to share their stories and that opportunity to heal. And so we offered those prayers that were led by local Wilton Rancheria representatives, and we had many elders and many youth that were there with us, and then held the march down to the fort area. And then at the fort, we were able to feed everyone, provide some t-shirts, and there were a number of local community organizations that were able to, to offer their services. And then each family had the opportunity to share their story. And I think one of the most powerful moments of that for me was that, I guess I'll just back up and share a little bit as well, that I also organized with the Anti-Police Terror Project out of Sacramento in recognizing, the impact, the systemic impact that families have dealt with in terms of state and police violence. And so what we do is that we hold vigils and we provide those healing, justice, support, and services to those families that have been impacted by state violence. And so, it was post-uprising events of the George Floyd uprisings. And so to hear local activists, to hear the local Miwok youth lead that march, and as they were walking up to the fort, there was a chant of whose land, and they were chanting Miwok land. And so just to have that narrative shifting, that narrative shift of this is what it means to be able to talk about us in the present tense. This is that shift against the erasure and invisibility that we face on a daily basis. And so that was a really powerful moment, and we will be organizing because of the pandemic. We had shut down events between January and May of this year, but we will definitely be holding more of those. So, and I'll just share, I had put in the chat earlier that, we always do look for opportunities in terms of, student research fellowships. We welcome that for sure. We have a new office here that's on J Street, 1201 J Street. In downtown Sacramento, so please contact us, and we're definitely happy to help connect and figure out, various volunteer and fellowship opportunities. And I guess I'll just stop there and just say, Sasulai, thank you so much for having us here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Powerful words and experiences to begin our conversation. Our next panelist is Irene de Baraicua from Líderes Campesinas. So again, Irene, you have 10 to 12 minutes. When you see me, I'll help keep track of time. So when you see me turn on the camera, it's just a kindly reminder that your time is almost up. Thank you.
Great.
Oh.
Thank you so much, Maria. And it was a pleasure to listen to the speakers today. I'm here also with Victoria Poz. And Victoria has been a great leader in terms of the organization that I represent today. It's Líderes Campesinas. And so we're here together today representing on this Día de la Mujer Internacional, Women's International Day, or International Women's Day. And so again, I represent Líderes Campesinas. It's a statewide network of women farm worker leaders. And my past background, my focus, I studied film, and I also have a minor in women's studies. And so I feel for the last 20 years, pretty much, a lot of my focus has been research about farm workers and being able to document their lives and be able to learn about their experiences, the battles that they face, both abroad and in this country. It's given me some exposure and insight and a firsthand account of the historical and systemic racism that farm workers continue to face, right? As a child, I grew up traveling to Guatemala, where my mother's family is from. And early on, just like here in the United States, I got to witness the classism, the sexism, the racism. And then throughout my younger adult years, I continued to investigate and want to learn more about the historical context. And the role that our own country here, the United States, has had on countries such as Guatemala and other Central American countries and even Mexico. And so what has brought me to work with Líderes Campesinas has been that experience of being able to not only do documentary films in Guatemala, with mainly focusing on indigenous farm workers, campesinos, who many times their land was taken from them due to political strife, due to wars that oftentimes the US was very much involved in. But I began doing more research about farm workers in our own country, in the United States, as part of the National Agriculture Workers Survey. And that's where I really got to see not only the migration of more indigenous communities coming to this country because they had to escape their own communities due to various reasons, whether it be poverty, violence, gangs, drugs, political strife. Many were out of work, right? Coming to the United States, supposedly seeking a better life. And so most of the farm workers that sustain this economy in California alone, billions of dollars is what immigrants pretty much sustain this economy in California. I wanted to actually share a small video, but I'm going to let also Victoria here introduce herself, but I did want to share just a small video. Would that be okay? Would I have access to share a screen? It's just about 5 minutes.
Yes, yes. Let me just make sure that. Oh, okay. It says right now it is disabled, the screen sharing. Let me see if I can, if maybe there's a co-host that can help me enable the screen sharing. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. I'll keep going, and if that's figured out, then we'll play it later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe towards the end of the panel.
And so just a little bit more about Líderes Campesinas. I'm currently Director of Operations and Communications for this statewide network of women farm worker leaders. And what we are composed of women and girls throughout the state of California, as far south as Coachella and all the way up north to Sonoma, Napa area. And throughout this pandemic, we've been really on the ground in response to COVID-19, right? Also, many of the longstanding issues have been brought to light, and many of these issues are faced by our indigenous communities of women that have come from other countries. The major populations that we see in the farm worker communities, they speak languages like Mixteco, Bajo, Alto, Triqui, Purépecha, and also Mam and Quiché from Guatemala. And the barriers that they have faced for many years have only been brought to light more throughout this COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, the inability to access resources, healthcare, not having a legal status in this country, the language barriers, there's huge communication gaps. And so many times the resources don't get to the communities that we tend to in our organization. And these are people in rural communities, oftentimes only speak Spanish or only speak indigenous languages. And so we have worked a lot in terms of trying to assess the situation, fight for different policies. We were part of the COVID-19 farm worker study, which the latest report that came out was focused on the indigenous communities in farm workers of California. And I'll share the link in the chat. And again, I'm going to also, just to get an idea too of a firsthand experience of someone who immigrated right to here, to Sacramento, first coming to the Bay Area. I'd like Victoria to sort of share a little bit more about her, and then hopefully we could share the video. I had some clips as well of some other members of our organization. So let me introduce Victoria. Adelante.
Kinya unimala ichiwe iwanogel kikikotle wanima porque vamos unimala invitación chue y desde el camino 8 de mayo. Hasa chen que van a celebrar esta actividad riveri chibanaba rutsili wech juntira, lehinka que kilo juntira, lehinka kabano, pues ujenka kaano para quererle más personas que kikaye juntira, lehinka bantajik, porque kilo mi ala, ya shatak hastak kapas kanon pasar como hoshojibo. Que maltioshir chiwe y chiana va a recibir junimalach a matzar rech relojer irkamik. Bueno, tengan muy buenos días a todos. Agradezco al Creador y al Formador que nos ha dado la vida y la salud. Gracias por esta invitación y aquí estoy. Hoy es el Día Internacional, el Día de la Mujer. ¿Por qué lo decimos internacional? Porque si nos damos cuenta, en Nueva York, en el 1984, ahí fue una fábrica donde mataron a 126 mujeres, ahí donde empezó la lucha de las mujeres. Y nosotros toda la vida en las calles así nos tratan, en los buses, si nos vamos en las camionetas, a veces que nuestro nombre no es, pero nos dice María. Es un ejemplo, mi nombre es Victoria y si yo quiero subir en un bus, lo primero que me dicen María. Eso no está bien para nosotros. Y a veces que nos vamos en la carretera o en las calles, vienen los hombres, empiezan a pitar de burlas de nosotras. Y nosotras tenemos nuestros derechos y a veces que nosotros nos pasa algo en la vida, como no tenemos documento, no tenemos nada y nosotros queremos ir a poner una demanda, pero no podemos porque lo primero que nos dicen que no somos de aquí, que no tenemos documento. Lastimosamente, hoy en día, a nosotras las mujeres nos han tratado muy mal. Nos tratan lo que ellos quieren para empezar con la migración cuando uno entra en este país. Uno a veces que trae a sus niños y lo mandan de regreso. O a veces le dicen a uno, porque me pasó a mí cuando yo me vine, me dijeron que mi hijo que yo traía no era mi hijo. Y sí era mi hijo. ¿Qué me dijeron? Que tenemos que llamar a Guatemala. Sí, de verdad. Yo he venido por una amenaza de política. Y por esa misma razón aquí estoy. Entonces, esperemos en Dios, nosotras las mujeres tenemos nuestros voz y voto para poner una denuncia que si alguien nos trata mal, ya no nos callamos nosotras las mujeres. Todas nosotras tenemos nuestros derechos de ir a trabajar y que si nos humillan, nosotros podemos poner una denuncia también, porque sabemos en los restaurantes a veces que no dejan que uno se para ni un momento ni tomar agua pura. Eso hay que denunciar también. Y hay personas que dueños de restaurante lo tratan mal a la persona. También pongamos una denuncia. Ya levantemos cabeza como mujeres que somos y también los hombres, porque tenemos la ley de igualdad. La igualdad como mujer y como hombre, tenemos derecho de poner una denuncia. Yo creo que les pido con todo mi corazón que nos levantemos como mujeres que somos. Como yo soy mujer indígena, mi dialecto es el quiché. Yo soy de Guatemala, soy del departamento de Suchitepeques de Mazatenango. Y me da gusto y honor de estar aquí porque yo soy un líder de mi comunidad. Fui presidenta plataforma municipal de la Defensoría de la Mujer Indígena de 5 departamentos y me siento orgullosa de sacar adelante a mis comunidades porque sabemos en el área rural no tenemos ese acceso, no podemos, nosotros vamos y no nos animamos a poner una denuncia. ¿Por qué razón? Porque nosotros no sabemos cuáles son nuestros derechos, pero gracias sea a Dios que ya la Defensoría de la Mujer Indígena y como líderes de nuestras comunidades fuimos abriendo cabezas a nuestras amigas, a nuestras compañeras y gracias sea a Dios, aquí estoy. Dejé mi cargo en Guatemala, pero primeramente Dios, hoy voy a luchar porque estoy aquí y yo sé que no hay bastante personas de Guatemala, de otros departamentos que no pueden ellos también, no quieren poner una denuncia cuando los tratan mal. Yo una cosa les voy a decir, compañeras, ya no dejemos que nos humillen. Nosotros tenemos derecho, tenemos nuestro valor para hacer eso. Y desde ya les mando un abrazo a todas y que Dios me los bendiga. Hoy, 8 de marzo, Día Internacional de la Mujer. Y yo estoy muy agradecido por esta invitación que me hicieron y aquí estoy presente. Mi nombre es Victoria Pos. Estoy agradecido de parte del equipo que me ha hecho esa invitación y les agradezco mucho a todos los que nos están viendo en las redes sociales. Que Dios me los bendiga, que el Creador y Formador los bendiga a cada uno de ustedes y que pase una bonita tarde y feliz día de las mujeres. Bendiciones a todos.
Muchas gracias, Victoria.
Irene, gustaría traducir un poquito lo que, muchas gracias, Victoria, qué fuerte, qué fuerte. Muchas gracias también por representar a Guatemala y su voz, ¿verdad? Su voz aclarece muy bien y fortalece las voces que usted también representa, como usted dice, las mujeres guatemaltecas, indígenas, maya y chil, que pues ahorita no pueden hablar como usted puede en esta plataforma. So, mi corazón, muchas gracias. Irene, do you mind maybe just giving the gist, translating a little bit? I have a little, I also got on little parts. I could help you as well.
Yeah, if there's anything I miss, so pretty much started the conversation or her introduction by speaking in her language of Quiche and recognizing the International Day of Women, and also the historical context of the women in the factory in the 1800s that it burned down, right? And the struggle of the historical struggle with women. And then also the discrimination that she has faced since coming to this country, that often the typical, the always calling her Maria or other women Maria, the sexual harassment, the acoso sexual, how they would call it, right? Either in the street, being whistled at, being how do you call it? Cat calls, and as a woman, right? And she's just calling for this stop to the constant harassment that women face, and also her experience even in the fields and in the work site, in the restaurants, the discrimination that people face, and then the fear because not being documented. Oftentimes, people don't want to file complaints with the law. They don't want to call for help. And also women who face abuses oftentimes are in fear to even report these things. I don't know if there's anything exactly that you would want to cover. I'm sorry, Maria.
Oh no, thank you, Irene. That was great. Just towards the end, Victoria also talked about how she was at the U.S., right, Mexico international border. She was told that her son was not hers. She's fleeing political persecution from Guatemala. And, she kept echoing that we have, as women, right, we have our voices and we will not be silenced, that if somebody is disrespecting or discriminating against you, to be proactive and, create denuncias, complaints, right, to get some sort of social and legal action and kind of public outrage so that these actions, right, are not continued to be normalized. And most importantly, she said that we as women cannot allow anybody to humiliate us anymore. So thank you both. We will go to our next participant, Edith Elizondo from Alerta Raquel, and I believe Ivan is going to translate for Edith.
Bueno, creo que ya puedo iniciar, ¿verdad? Sí.
Claro, con gusto.
Ok. Muy buenas tardes a todos, a todas y a todes. Yo soy Edith Elizondo del Pulgarcito de América, de El Salvador. Muy contenta de estar en este espacio, de poder compartir. Realmente, siempre cuando conectamos con todas las historias de las compañeras, sobre todo de estos países tan cercanos y tan hermanos, también como Guatemala, Honduras, siempre se mueven muchas cosas por dentro. Un poco para poner un poco en contexto, El Salvador tiene una identidad robada. En El Salvador, en 1932, hubo una masacre, un genocidio hacia los pueblos indígenas de nuestro país, y esto vino con el saqueo de todas las tierras, despojos de tierras y sobre todo los territorios de los pueblos indígenas. Y con eso trajo con ello todo el tema de la estigmatización y el tema de olvidar nuestra identidad como personas indígenas. En El Salvador, a diferencia de Guatemala, Honduras o Nicaragua también, que son nuestros pueblos más cercanos, no tenemos la diversidad cultural que tienen estos otros países, porque hubo toda una campaña para borrar toda nuestra identidad. Entonces, bueno, como ejemplo más claro, menos del 10% de nuestra población habla náhuatl. La mayoría de las personas desconoce sobre todo el tema de nuestra historia, porque hay un desconocimiento total sobre nuestra historia, sobre nuestras raíces indígenas. Entonces, nunca van a ver en un formulario el reconocimiento y poderte, tú como persona, como mujer, nombrarte como indígena o nombrarte como mestiza. Y yo veo a mis compañeras de Guatemala, Honduras, que son las que físicamente, con las que más me parezco, y me reconozco desde ahí, pero no me puedo nombrar desde ahí por toda esta identidad robada. Entonces también es como muy difícil, digamos, esta situación, como para ponerles un poco de contexto. Una de las situaciones que enfrentamos, sobre todo las mujeres salvadoreñas, es el tema de bueno, creo que en Centroamérica nos atraviesan las violencias, y estas violencias patriarcales muy fuertes.
Edith, disculpe, pero yo creo que ahorita es perfecto para que Iván puede traducir todo su brillante discurso. Iván, are you
Yeah, I can hear you
available
all.
to, okay, your audio is working, okay.
Yes. So as she was saying, she was introducing herself, Edith. She's from El Salvador, and she was mentioning that as opposed to other Central American countries like Guatemala or Honduras, in El Salvador, it's difficult to identify yourself as indigenous because there has been a cultural campaign to erase that identity. An example of it would be like I think she said 1932, there was a genocide of indigenous people. And also the fact that less than 10% of the population actually speak Nahuatl, an indigenous language. So it has been very difficult to identify yourself as indigenous, even if, like she mentioned, like her facial features and she identifies as it, but it just legally, I guess it's been difficult for her.
Y Edith, sí, siga su discurso, pero si puede así en pauses para traer la traducción. Muchas gracias.
No, gracias a ustedes. Si no hablo mucho también. Sí, como un poco también las dificultades que enfrentamos las mujeres salvadoreñas y creo que todas las mujeres a nivel de Centroamérica son el tema de las violencias y las desapariciones forzadas. Yo formo parte de una iniciativa que es Alerta Raquel, que es una iniciativa que lo que busca son alertas tempranas en desapariciones de niñas, mujeres y adolescentes. Lamentablemente, es una situación que nos estamos enfrentando las organizaciones que hacemos de defensa de derechos humanos y que es una de las vulneraciones más grandes a los derechos humanos que puede existir. Creo que es una de las formas y de las expresiones más fuertes de violencia social que puede vivir una familia y sobre todo las mujeres, porque lamentablemente siempre somos las mujeres las más afectadas, porque son las madres las que buscan sin descanso a sus hijos, cuando hay un sistema que en vez de garantizarles un debido proceso, lo que hace es revictimizar a las mujeres. Me voy a quedar ahí.
And so as she was saying, Central American women are kidnapped and go missing, and organizations like Alerta Raquel are here as like a human rights defense, and mentioning that violence against women is also like violence against families, and that's like one of the worst violations of human rights in your opinion.
Y como un elemento creo que muy importante para poner y para contextualizarles es que la mayoría de mujeres que desaparecen en El Salvador son mujeres jóvenes, mujeres de zonas rurales de El Salvador, mujeres que viven en colonias estigmatizadas, que muchas de estas desapariciones tienen a la base también el tema de los feminicidios. Muchas de las mujeres son encontradas posteriormente, muchas han sido asesinadas por sus parejas. Entonces también hay todo un tema de estigmatización que a veces se cree que en El Salvador todo el tema de violencia tiene que ver con el tema de las pandillas o el crimen organizado, pero también hay razones de venganza por parte de sus parejas hacia las mujeres como parte, digamos, de cómo se encubre esta situación en El Salvador. Porque a veces te hace creer que todo el tema de desapariciones, el tema de feminicidios, tiene que ver nada más con el tema de pandillas. Y ahí es donde se encubre realmente la violencia patriarcal y misógina que está instalada en El Salvador y en muchos territorios centroamericanos.
So as she was saying, the majority of the women that go missing are young, from rural areas, from areas that are usually stigmatized, and they have been found to be killed by intimate partners. And it is portrayed as only gang violence, the reason that the women go missing, but in reality, it's a big part is also intimate partner violence. And that just goes to show the patriarchal perspective that likes to label it as gang violence instead of actually intimate partner violence.
Sí, y quizás para ir finalizando, los cuerpos que siempre son botines de guerra son los cuerpos de las mujeres. Y una de las cosas que siempre posicionamos es que los primeros territorios que tenemos que defender son estos cuerpos en los que habitamos, estos cuerpos de mujeres que siempre se ven vulnerados por todas las violencias que atravesamos. Es lamentable que en El Salvador en estos momentos los diputados, que son los garantes, que son los que deben garantizar nuestros derechos humanos como mujeres, estén hablando de derogar leyes que históricamente nos han costado mucho a las mujeres del movimiento feminista y que quieran derogar estas leyes que han sido de beneficio para las mujeres, como la Ley Especial Integral para una vida libre de violencias de las mujeres. Entonces, aparte del contexto que estamos viviendo de la violencia, porque hemos sido un país que hemos estado en constante conflicto, venimos de un conflicto de 1932 con los genocidios indígenas, después un conflicto civil, después un conflicto de pandillas, y de crimen organizado, y quienes hemos vivido y a quienes al final atravesado todas estas violencias es a las mujeres, pero sobre todo a las mujeres más empobrecidas, a las mujeres que vivimos en situaciones de vulnerabilidades, que vivimos en comunidades que tienen poco acceso también a la educación. Entonces también tiene que ver con un tema de clase y también un tema de que seguimos pensando que las mujeres en El Salvador, o siguen pensando que las mujeres somos sujetas de segunda categoría.
So she mentions that the bodies most affected by war are women, and women are always affected first and foremost whenever times of war happen, like going from in El Salvador in 1932, going from the genocide. She mentions then going on to civil unrest, civil conflict, and now up to gang violence. It has always been women the one most affected.
Sí, me voy a quedar hasta aquí. De verdad agradezco el espacio para poder comentarles, para poder contarles un poco de todas las situaciones que enfrentamos las mujeres en El Salvador. Una de las situaciones más grandes es el tema de los feminicidios, las desapariciones forzadas, pero también hay todo un tema de abuso sexual y embarazos en adolescentes que tienen cubierto aún a la base el tema de las uniones tempranas de niños, porque aún está tan naturalizado que niñas y adolescentes sean madres. Entonces, creo que es una de las cosas más fuertes que vivimos. Y el tema de la penalización absoluta también del aborto, pues somos uno de los países a nivel mundial, de los 5 países a nivel mundial que tienen las leyes más restrictivas en aborto, y que hay mujeres condenadas viviendo penas en cárceles de 30 años por complicaciones obstétricas, y sobre todo mujeres de las zonas más rurales y más empobrecidas de nuestro país. Entonces me quedo hasta aquí. Muchas gracias por la atención y por la invitación.
So she was just mentioning she wants to thank everyone for having the opportunity to talk, especially about these femicides, forced marriage, forced pregnancies, mentioning that El Salvador is one of the countries with the most restrictive laws on abortion. So she just wants to thank everyone for having the platform to speak on that.
Thank you, Iván, for the translation. Gracias a ti, Edith. Vamos a continuar a hablar de varios temas. So I'm just thanking Edith for her delivering such a powerful, understanding of feminicidios in El Salvador. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Andrea Guadalupe Luna Santana, is experiencing technical difficulties. She's not able to join, but she has sent me a document with some of the thoughts that she was going to share for today. So I'm just going to read the document and also time myself. So Andrea Guadalupe Luna Santana was born and raised in Veracruz, Mexico. She currently lives in Tijuana, Baja California, and a lot of her organization in terms of the sexual diversity organization that she is also based in. It operates in Juarez, Chihuahua. So I asked her to come to the panel to speak about Mexico, specifically Tijuana, Juarez border cities. And, so she gave me, again, it's just a document of it's like a page and a half of what her shared or her thoughts. Andrea also identifies as a transgender woman and also as a lesbian. So she states, I present to you 10 reasons why trans women and the different trans corporalities should mobilize this March 8th. 1, against trans feminicides. Mexico, only behind Brazil, ranks second in Latin America where the most hate crimes are committed. And for each reported crime, it is estimated that there are 3 more that remain silent. Number 2, against transphobia. Day after day at school, public space, and work, we face transphobic violence that discriminates and stigmatizes us. Let's mobilize against transphobia, bullying, and the moral heteronormativity that dictates how our bodies and our sexuality should be. Number 3, for a national gender identity law. In Mexico City in 2015, modifications to the Civil Code and the Code of Civil Procedures allowed the change of gender identity administratively. However, this is something that happens only in the capital of the country. And in some states, the authorities continue to deny recognition and legal change to trans people. This together with the heteronormativity means that many trans people are left without access to both work and public services, where gender identity does not coincide with official documents. Number 4, for the right to work. The majority of the trans population does not have access to salaried jobs with a living wage and benefits. On the contrary, gender identity is usually a filter to access many jobs or stay in one. In the case of people who transit having salaried jobs. A large part of the trans population is engaged in informal work. And in the case of women, many are forced into sex work. And those who are salaried, the majority have lower salaries than their non-trans counterparts. In Argentina, the trans movement has promoted the trans quota law that obliges the different provinces to, quote, employ transvestites, transgender, and transsexual people in 1% of their total staff, since the state is responsible for guaranteeing the right to equality, gender identity, and formal work to improve the quality of life for trans people, end of quote. The trans movement would have to mobilize for a law that guarantees decent work for all trans people. Number 5, for access to free specialized medical care for trans people throughout the country. For many trans people, body technologies, hormonal treatments and surgeries, for example, are a very important part of their transition. The high costs of hormonal treatments, the daily medical checkups that these treatments imply, and the sex change surgeries mean that only the few people who can pay large amounts of money have access to these treatments, many for life or for long periods of time in a safe way. Young people and working class people can hardly afford any treatment, and many resort to hormonation, which without knowledge or advice has serious health consequences. The trans movement must demand that in each state of the country, she's specifically speaking to Mexico, there is a free specialized medical service for trans people. Number 6, for sex education. Both the church as well as some political parties and now the National Front for the Family have long opposed to integrating content on human sexual diversity in the basic levels of public education in Mexico. On the contrary, the Ministry of Public Education, under the influence of the church, has promoted conservative and heteronormative ideas about sexuality, in which the hate speech with which the church and political parties discriminate against trans, gays, and lesbians is supported, and they criminalize women and also trans men who decide to have abortions. And number 7, for the this is a tough one, depathologying of trans identities. In the country, in many public psychological and psychiatric medical services, trans identities continue to be pathological by placing them in the category of gender dysphoria. This not only sets a series of diagnostic steps to follow to acquire treatments for transition into hormones or sex change, but also favors stigmatization and discrimination of trans people by classifying them as mentally ill or disturbed. Depathologizing trans identities does not have to imply the loss of any free medical service for the transition gained. Added to this, it goes hand in hand with the demand for investment in specialized public medical services for trans people. And lastly, number 8, and this is all Andrea, this word by word, it is her document. Recently, the church, number 8 is for the effective separation of the church and state. Recently, the church and far-right political parties organized themselves into the National Front for the Family to oppose the expansion. And Andrea also, you know, she talked to me that, or she told me that the reason that she left Veracruz for Juarez or for Tijuana was because of the social rejection of not only her trans woman identity, but also her lesbian identity, primarily from the church, from the religious, you know, aspects of her community. And lastly, she was also going to speak on the recent case. It happened, I believe, in mid-January of this year. A lesbian couple by the name of Yulisa and Noemi, both of them, from what I understand, lived in El Paso, Texas, and were visiting friends in Juarez, Mexico. They were also the mothers of 5 young children from previous marriage, from a previous marriage. So Yulisa and Noemi disappeared from El Paso and from Juarez a day after both of their bodies were found severed, tortured, dismembered in multiple body bags in the San Isidro area of Juarez. And this is what Andrea and the organization, La Diversidad Sexual de Chihuahua, so activists from Baja California and from Chihuahua joined joined forces to make sure that the explicit lesbian phobia, right, that is entrenched within the feminicides and the narco state in Mexico does not go impune. And the Mexican prosecutor at that time was also facing a lot of backlash because he refused to consider that this feminicidio of the young lesbian couple, one of which was Yulisa, was masculine presenting. He refused to even consider that this could be a hate crime. You know, and the update on that case was that I believe a couple, a man and a woman, were individually charged for that case and for killing them, for killing the young couple. But in terms of the narco violence, you know, the feminicidal violence, in terms of the overkill, that is not being really discussed or, you know, considered in the charges against these 2 individual people, which really just kind of echoes and reiterates the history of Mexico. Even when it comes to feminicidio, they just want to grab whoever they can and say, oh, these are the people responsible, we're going to charge them, because they want to quell the social outrage, right, that is brewing. But, you know, those charges, I don't know if you can call them justice because they're still very individualized and not larger systemic, right, policies that call for impunity, larger impunity. So thank you everybody for listening to Andrea through me. I could not write that. That's a very powerful list. So now, you know, we have 30 minutes to continue our conversation in a more fluid manner with the questions that me and my colleagues presented to you, to all the panelists. So I'm just going to start with the first question, and whoever wants to jump in, you know, I'm all for it. So question number one, how does the location, for example, California, El Salvador, Mexico, the United States, of your communities shape the types of violence that women face? And you guys have already talked about it a little bit. Intimate partner violence, familial femicide, police, military violence. How does this local violence connect to the global rise of violence against women? ¿Cómo influye la ubicación de sus comunidades en California, Salvador, México, en los tipos de violencia que enfrentan las mujeres, como violencia de pareja íntima, feminicidio familiar, violencia policial o militar? ¿Cómo se conecta esta violencia local con el aumento global sistemático de la violencia contra las mujeres? Morningstar Galley, would you like to start us out?
Sure. I first just want to say that I'm very appreciative of all of the words that were shared by the panelists, and just very powerful in all of their storytelling and recollections. And I actually just returned from Panajachel, Guatemala, just a couple of days ago for an International Indian Treaty Council conference, where we did write a submission, a United Nations human rights submission on violence against Indigenous women. And included in that submission was much of what was spoken to by the other panelists. And so that's still in draft format, but I will definitely share that, and would love to share more just in terms of that. I also serve as the California Tribal and Community Liaison for IITC. So I just think that, you know, when we are making these connections, you know, across you know, our communities, that, you know, for California specifically, you know, recognizing that California was founded on state-sponsored genocide, that it was through the, but, you know, we say there was an exchange of, there was an exchange of Indigenous women's bodies for stolen land. And so we see, you know, in these testimonies, how that's happening, you know, all across, and due to colonialism, due to, you know, this consumer culture that, you know, is founded on the taking of Indigenous bodies and theft of our theft of our culture, theft of our values even, and what we hold sacred to us. And so I just wanted to share that briefly, that, you know, this country, this state, right here where we are in Sacramento, that it was state-sanctioned genocide that paid for, you know, our heads and our scalps of who we are as Native peoples. And that has never ended. As we heard in these testimonies, the Indian wars have never ended, you know, that it continues. And so, yeah, just lots of gratitude for this opportunity to be in solidarity and share in our stories and in our struggles.
Thank you.
Sí, hola. Yo creo que también en nuestras comunidades y en nuestros territorios se entrelazan sistemas de muerte. Y estos sistemas son el sistema capitalista, el sistema patriarcal y el sistema colonial, que son sistemas que lo que han hecho es son sistemas que se entrelazan en nuestros territorios y en nuestras comunidades, que uno sostiene al otro y se perpetúan históricamente. Entonces, una de las cosas que que nosotras también desde los feminismos, que no podemos hablar de patriarcalizar sin hablar de decolonizar también el pensamiento. Entonces creo que hablar no solo del patriarcado instalado en nuestros territorios que se implementan todas estas formas de violencia, sino hablar de esas otras violencias que están entrelazadas y que al final son sistemas de muerte que atentan contra la vida y lo que está al centro.
Ivan, are
Yeah.
you still with us?
Yeah, I could go ahead and
Okay,
translate
thank
that.
you.
So as Adit was saying, it isn't only the femicides as much as like the sexism, as much as it is the intersection of sexism with patriarchal institutions and capitalist institutions. So these interconnect and intersect to create systems of violence that we see. So as she was mentioning.
Thank you. Gracias, Edith y Iván. Irene y Victoria, do you have any thoughts for the question, or if you want, you could go to another question?
Yeah, I think we'll go to another question. It's okay to go on. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to question number 2. A lot of activism is done on the murders of women, but how do you approach the violence of disappearance? Do murder and disappearance mean the same to you? When a family member never finds the body of their loved one, how do they attempt to work towards healing, closure, and justice? Se hace mucho activismo sobre los asesinatos de mujeres, pero ¿cómo abordas la violencia de la desaparición? ¿El asesinato y la desaparición significan lo mismo para ti? Cuando un miembro de la familia nunca encuentra el cuerpo de sus seres queridos, ¿cómo es que intentan trabajar hacia la curación, el cierre y la justicia?
Sí. Voy a comentar de lo que acerca. Justamente es el tema de alertas tempranas en la emisión, ya que los estados no están garantizando también en este sentido este accionar. Sí, definitivamente, en muchas ocasiones, detrás de una desaparición de las mujeres, terminan en feminicidios y muchos perpetuados por sus parejas. Creo que es lamentable también, y era un elemento que ponía en el planteamiento anterior, que muchas veces se cree que todo el tema de las desapariciones tiene que ver con el crimen organizado, en El Salvador específicamente. Y no, tiene a la base también encubrir feminicidios de muchas mujeres en nuestro país. Es triste, o sea, cuando no puedes darle una respuesta a una madre o a un padre que busca a un hijo o a una hija, son de las situaciones que como alerta, que como personas que acompañamos a las familias que buscan, es de las situaciones más dolorosas, porque es una de las violaciones más atroces a los derechos humanos de una persona. Y justamente nosotras, desde lo poco que hacemos, es también apoyar desde acompañar a las madres en procesos psicosociales, en grupos de ayuda también, a darles la voz a ellas, porque yo no creo que hay una verdad más que la de ellas que están viviendo en carne propia estas situaciones, que son los que tienen que marcar las rutas, que tienen que decirnos cuál es el camino y cuál es la mejor acción para ellas y también para sus familias, y la forma de poder vivir sus duelos también, porque no hay un cierre. El problema con las desapariciones es que no hay un cierre.
So as Adith mentions, that's one of the most difficult things that Alerta Raquel does, because disappearances, there's no closure to it. So one of the things that Alerta Raquel does is accompaniment for mothers and parents who have lost their daughters or loved ones have disappeared, and they help them through that process, because a lot of the times it's not so much gang violence, like she mentioned before, as much as it is intimate partner violence. And only the parents, only the victims, can actually, the families of the victims can actually decide like what they want to do, the next steps. So they help them through that process.
This is Morningstar. I'll just share that, yes, for the families that are not able to recover the body of their loved ones, that it is a very difficult process just in terms of grieving and not feeling that they have that closure. And so, again, supporting the families and whatever they are seeking and what justice looks like for them. What we've been working on is, the guidebooks, the just like very basic 10 steps of when your loved one goes missing, 10 steps of when your loved one is murdered, because it is a different path in terms of healing and seeking justice. And so just really supporting them through that process in all of it.
Thank you, Morningstar. Victoria or Irene?
I was just going to add in terms of many times what we've seen with human trafficking, and at times even when some of the family is here in the United States and it's happening in Mexico or in Guatemala, a lot of times when it does end in death of a loved one, the resources, even though when they know who the culprit was, right, who did this, in these rural areas, at times the lack of the resources and being able to actually charge the person or approve it, or they don't have the DNA testing, but yet everybody knows who did that. That's one of the biggest crime done to many mothers and women that lose their children. And well, in the victims themselves, is they know who is committing these crimes. And it's a similar parallel to the systemic violence that we see here of people killed even at our border. The system is not held accountable, right? But we know who did it. We know who has killed many migrants coming across the border, and yet nothing is done about it. And these women are suffering, and many times that's the most horrible part, is to see the people still walking free and nothing being done, aside from those unsolved cases. And no sé si Victoria, ¿quieres agregar algo sobre las preguntas de desaparecencias, cuando mujeres desaparecen y no se hacen?
Bien, hay mujeres que sí se desaparecen, los secuestran, y como cuando una persona no tiene dinero o de categoría, o porque lo miran que el pelo es pintado, es canche la persona, le dan prioridad. Ahora, cuando las personas del área rural y como nosotras las mujeres, lo que callamos, no llevamos un proceso, no vamos a exigir nuestros derechos, no vamos a las autoridades a poner la denuncia y pedir, porque sí tenemos que pedir. Pero ¿qué hacemos nosotros? Ponemos la denuncia y ya no vamos. Nosotros lo que queremos es que nos llaman y vamos. Si no nos llaman, nos quedamos sentaditas. Entonces yo creo que nosotras en el área rural, nosotros a veces que nosotros damos motivo. ¿Por qué? Porque no llevar un proceso legal. El proceso legal es poner una denuncia. De la denuncia uno va al proceso a preguntar cómo va el caso, qué está sucediendo con su caso de uno. Pero nosotros no hacemos eso. Solo pongamos la denuncia y nos quedamos. Nosotros lo que queremos es que nos llaman para ver cómo va el proceso y eso no es así. Yo creo que si nosotros nos organizamos bien como líderes de nuestras comunidades y alzar la voz y hacer reuniones con las personas que no saben cuáles son sus derechos, yo creo que es como que abrir un espacio para nosotros y me gustaría tener una mesa técnica para dialogar nosotras mismas. Todo lo que yo sé, tal vez mi compañera no sabe y lo que ella sabe no lo sé yo. Entonces es como intercambio de experiencia. Me gustaría tener esa mesa técnica para seguir más el proceso y nosotras mismas vamos a saber cuáles son nuestros derechos de nosotras y de las demás personas que están atrás de nosotros, porque nosotros sabemos cuáles son nuestros derechos, pero lastimosamente otras personas que están atrás de nosotros no saben. Entonces yo les pido de favor y yo les agradezco mucho con todo mi corazón por todo lo que están haciendo. Es para llevar más a las personas que han callado todos los años que vienen sufriendo, porque sí, hablamos la verdad. Hay personas en la casa, lo pegan por sus esposos. Aquí dice, aquí hay cómo se mira cuando una mujer lo pegan, lo denuncia. No, los hombres lo pegan adentro y como nosotros nunca vamos a poner una denuncia o le tenemos miedo a nuestros esposos o nuestros esposos nos amenazan porque habemos mujeres. Yo soy madre soltera de 3 niños. Yo nunca me dejé con mi esposo que me maltrata. No, yo alcé mi voz y yo dije, no, yo tengo derecho como tú tienes derecho. Si tú tienes otra mujer, pues vete la otra mujer y yo voy a sacar adelante a mis hijos. Y gracias sea a Dios, aquí estoy con mis 3 hijos sacando adelante. Tengo 1 en Guatemala y tengo 2 aquí. Pero Dios siempre me ha bendecido, pero no todos somos iguales. Primero, ¿qué hacemos? Nos ponemos a chillar. Si me va a dejar, ¿quién me va a dar gasto? ¿Quién me va a mantener? No, nosotros las mujeres le damos gracias a Dios porque tenemos nuestras manos, nuestros ojos, nuestras bocas y nuestros pies. Con eso es suficiente. Uno trabaja para sacar adelante a sus hijos. Yo creo que todas las mujeres que nos están viendo en las redes sociales, alcemos nuestras voces. Ya no dejemos que nos humillan, porque nosotras mismas nos humillamos adelante de los hombres o porque no puede comprarme mi blusa, me humillo yo adelante de él, no. Yo soy capaz de hacer mis cosas y me gustaría que todas las mujeres, que así seamos, de sacar adelante a nosotras mismas. Ya no vamos a aguantar los hombres que nos tratan mal, que nos humillan. Ya no es tiempo que nos humillan ahora. Yo les agradezco mucho por este espacio y que el Creador y Formador les bendiga a cada uno por nombre y muchas bendiciones a todos y que pasen una bonita tarde.
Muchas gracias, Victoria. Uy, ya me va a hacer llorar. Irene, would you like maybe bits and pieces of and look at the chat. Everybody's just loving Victoria.
So, I'm sorry, was someone going to speak? So, you know, she's just really emphasizing the need to always raise our voices as women, right? Being able to speak up, to not allow the violence against women, abuse from any husbands, and she just sort of touched on some of her own personal accounts as well, in terms of you know, having to maybe leave a partner that was potentially trying to mistreat her, and so she decided to just move on with her 3 children. 2 of her children live here, and another one lives still in Guatemala, and so for the most part, at the beginning, in relation to the question, it was more that that people just are fearful. Many of the women are fearful of denouncing, or they don't insist, right, to go through the whole process that needs to be done. And so many times this is, it needs to be more effort involved, and also a really good point that she did make. And I'm sorry, I didn't know I was going to interpret. I'm not very good at interpreting sometimes, especially when it's a lot of information. But
You're
just,
doing great.
when someone is of a blonde, blonde, perhaps this is how she started, and that was very important. That someone that maybe is blonde and ends up disappearing and missing, they'll get a lot more attention on the media, and that's things that we see here as well, right? But everywhere, sort of in other countries too. It's when the color of your skin might be lighter, or you're of a blonde hair, that you get more attention, and so there's more efforts involved. But in her communities, or people in the rural communities, they really need to make a lot more efforts to keep insisting, and that many people don't do it, and they give up. And so she is really making a call out to people to get together and have roundtables, which I know many folks here do, right? And she wants to be a part of that, and be able to learn from people, and learn from her as well, and be able to raise voices together, and really inspire other women to speak up and put an end to the violence, and many sorts of violence, right?
Thank you both, Victoria and Irene, Morningstar, Edith. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. I've had chills, mis pelitos se alzaron toda nuestra conversación. Desafortunadamente, unfortunately, we're out of time, but just very quickly to just end it, we've talked a lot about violence against women, indigenous women, vulnerable women, but what comes out a lot in the chat and in the all of the panelists, and I think it was Edith who also said, right, the violence against our families is so insidious, right? Because sometimes it's not just against the woman herself, it's against the children, the babies. And I'm sure many of you are aware that I think 2 weeks ago, there was a horrific crime here in Sacramento in the Arden area, where a father killed his 3 young children. And I think it's very important to say their names. Samantha Mora Gutierrez, 10. Samara Mora Gutierrez, 9. Samaya Mora Gutierrez, 13. Those 3 young girls, were taken too quick because of domestic violence that, exacerbates into family annihilation. And I study genocide, and this stuff I can't stomach. So, I think it's important to say their names. 3 beautiful Chicana, Mexicana young women that are now angels. And, muchas gracias. Thank you for all the work. And, our work matters, and we need to fight even harder, especially, for the young girls to have a future and to be outside, of those toxic relationships that result deadly. So muchas gracias. Thank you. I hope we see each other again. Adiós. Muchas gracias.